I'm not using the camera, and I also will probably do better by sitting close to my microphone.
What you have to decide. I can give you a speaker. You do it in the USB. Everybody can speak, and you'll hear it better. Yeah.
In the meantime, I will try to advance. I said this is what I'll try to run you through in 45 minutes or so. What are seed systems, different ways of looking at it, formal and informal seed systems, pathways of development, and a last word on governance. Well, what is it about seeds? I mean, seeds is something, it's something extremely crucial, but it's crucial in many, many ways, many different ways. Somehow it resonates with us, but in all kind of different forms, because it resonates with us because seeds is something magic. Seed is something symbolic. It has values for us, cultural. But, seed is also just a very crucial input for agricultural production with a lot of economic values. So seed is something with multiple functions, multiple values, and thereby also multiple actors that have some sort of value and interest in it. And we all engage with that seed in one way or another, but in very different ways. So meaning very many different actors with very many different interests. And these interests are for sure not always very easily aligning with themselves. Because think of all the debates that we have going on in the world around, GMOs, multinational seed companies, food sovereignty, seed sovereignty, and all these different debates related with different stakeholders representing societal debates is then also the world in which we operate as practitioners who can someone now accept somebody in the lobby, because I cannot see that now. How can I turn on my own camera? I'm afraid to.
Just if you open. Yeah, no, just leave it like that.
No,
it's amazing.
People are seeing now this screen.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So we as
is that good then, because we are seeing two different screens?
You are not seeing. You are not seeing the presentation mode. You are seeing, let's say, my screen.
Exactly, your screen.
Let me check.
I have now all kind of people helping me, and there's all kind of different solutions.
I think stop sharing, and then it like.
No, I don't think it's
swap.
Yeah, maybe just.
Yeah.
What about now?
Great.
Yep.
Okay, so now here in the room you see my, let's say, my script mode between it. I'm so terribly sorry for this, but I'm lost at it. I tried my best. Hey, we're moving on. So we have this seeds landscape with many different actors with different values and interests, a lot of debates around seeds in one way or another. And it's in this world where we as practitioners trying to intervene in seed systems to make them better, but also as researchers studying seed systems, from whatever disciplines, many different disciplines, that we have this, the many different ways of looking at seeds, but it also represents great, big complexity in dealing with it, because how do you deal with those debates? How do you deal with all those different actors? How do you deal with all those different disciplines? That represents complexity. Yeah. In that complexity, for us as researchers, the word system, related with seed system, becomes a very operational concepts on trying to accommodate all these different interest angles and views and ways of looking at systems, looking at seed systems. Now, you talk about seed systems in a very easy way, not realizing probably that the word systems is not so extremely old. When I started in this university, and I just told you that that is some time ago, but that's, let's say, the 70s, 80s, here in Wageningen, system thinking was a new way of thinking and trying to deal with complexity. And this is one of the first system figures that came into being, and they are from the Wageningen cropping people. So you have cropping systems, you have livestock systems, you have farming systems, and you have landscape systems. That was the first effort to kind of give shape to this system thinking. And the crucial words are their system levels. You can see that here. It goes from a low level to a very high level national global system. Entities that are related to each other at a particular system level or between system levels. And the boundaries of the system. When you talk about a system, you know, the way it was initially meant, there's always things, entities and relations that are part of the system and that is outside the system. And what's outside of the system is kind of not part of what you're looking at. So initially this system thinking got its origin with the cropping and plant people that are now the famous cropping and plant modelers, and there are some here in the room from that department. But Wageningen is also very known for the social science input, and of course these social scientists soon came up with their take at system thinking, the soft system thinking, and started to mess around with the system definitions and concepts of the natural scientists, and you get this kind of figures. Or, you know, this for the social scientists is also a system. Things go up, other things go down. When something over there connects with something, then you have a disconnection on the other side. So this kind of messing up kind of has enlarged the way of conceptualizing what a system is. Yeah. And here you have even a more beautiful way of thinking about a system. And this is how the ecologists do it when they talk about food webs. Yeah. Relations between entities. And that is more or less also how we take it to seed systems. It's relations between entities. And this is one way of thinking about a seed system. And this is actually something that I kind of pieced together with colleagues of mine some 20, 30 years ago. I'll come back to that. This is when I do it with a pencil, when I map entities and seed flows of cassava in Nigeria. It looks like that. It's also a form of a system. Here on the bottom left, you see now a system which is actually conceptualized as a value chain, but it's also it's genetic resource conservation, breeding, seed multiplication, farmers, markets, also a system. This is again another way of conceptualizing it. And here again another way. And the last one to present is the seed system as conceptualized by Westhengen, Dalle, and de Schomer, which will also come to talk about more. Yeah, they're all different ways of conceptualizing seed systems. Yeah, the relations between entities at different levels, different dimensions. Now, this might be the way you feel familiar with when we talk about seed systems, if you've been there before. But don't forget, these are also seed systems. The left side is the circle of a seed going through different cycles. And the figure on the right-hand side is a basilicum seed with all the organisms around it on the seed coat and in its environment. If you think back about this very first drawing figure of a seed system, when you say you have higher levels and lower levels, then this is also a seed system. So when you come to talk with seed physiologists, for example, seed technologists, when you talk about a seed system, they may think about a totally different thing. Okay?
There are some people that are waiting in the room.
Can you give them entry?
No, because you don't have permission. I think the organizers only can do it.
And now the display settings again.
Okay.
Yeah, swap. Yeah. Formal and informal seed systems again. Yeah. Now, the idea of a seed system, or initially it was about a seed sector, was something that came into being when our knowledge about genetics and seed technology was spurring up. Yeah. Once we understood DNA. And could you please, the person who is talking there, mute it, because we're all disturbed by it? Me especially. So yeah, we understood genetics, and understanding genetics and applying it in the field of making crossings between plants and also animals, and being able to select better performing plants, develop varieties, was becoming a specialization that became to be called breeding. Yeah. And we got specialized people in that, being breeders. And people who, with the technology of seed science, help to multiply and distribute that seed back to the farmers. So you have to imagine that actually it was the advances in genetics that generated the specialized skills of people that we call now breeders. And with that specialization, we also got breeding institutions that were not part of the farm anymore, but became, institutions and companies. So we got a formal seed sector. We got a seed sector. Yeah. And in those days, that was the seed system, because everything else, there was nothing. And it was, for me, thanks to the work of certain breeders who were like pseudo amateur anthropologists, and described, for example, in detail what maize farmers were doing in Central America, and how skillful these farmers selected their seeds and how much they knew about their maize varieties, that we said, well, is it actually true that there is only this specialized seed sector that we now call formal seed sector, and for the rest there is nothing? So it is thanks to these anthropologists that we came to realize, yeah, but actually it's not correct to say there is no seed system there, because these farmers are sowing, they're planting, they have seeds, they save seeds. And that's how actually then later on, I would say the end of the 90s, we started to say, no, but there is a farmer's seed system there. Yeah. And it's been particularly people like Trik Verberg, Jaap Hardon, that inspired people like me and like Ola to say, hey, but farmers are breeders and seed producers at the same time. And they have their breeding and seed production embedded in their food production. It is a highly integrated system, and the farmers managing it are very skillful, knowing their own environment. And in some aspects, they have more knowledge than breeders do. And it's this local seed system in the middle, yeah, that represents it. So it's not an empty world. It's not there is nothing. There's just another system. But it is not so well collected, because if you think about how the formal seed system uses the informal seed system, they use it to collect genes for the gene bank that are the pools for the breeders. Yeah. So they extract out of these local seed systems. And in the end, some farmers in these seed systems might use the seeds that come from the breeders and the seed producers of that formal system, but many farmers don't. So yeah, it's not that world out there is empty. There is a local system, a farmer system, but maybe it's not so well connected. And maybe what we should think about is, are there ways that we can make those systems integrate, connect in the different functions that they have? And that's where the idea of the integrated pluriform seed systems come from. Then this is the story mostly from the major food crops. So we're talking a lot about, thoughts of researchers working with maize, with potatoes, with beans, that kind of important crops. And you got then these ideas, we should think about in situ conservation, on-farm conservation. We should think about participatory plant breeding. We should think about farmer groups that produce seeds maybe for their environment or in a business form. That was that right circle idea, like, okay, let's look for connections. Let's look for how they can complement to each other, how we can construct some sort of a hybrid system, pluriform system. Yeah, that was the discussion that I think started some 20, 25 years ago, and I think we're still there. Would be interesting to discuss with each other, have we moved forward with that a lot, or did we get stuck somehow? Yeah, how much has this brought to the farmers? And that's where I think also I would like to call a lot upon our practitioners in the group to say how their farmers benefit, the farmers in their project benefit from those kind of thoughts, interventions, initiatives, efforts. Okay, moving on a bit. Yeah. I have this just a slide to make you realize what the formal system essentially. It has an international dimension of the CGIAR. Then most of the countries have a national system of breeding and seed production. The NARIs, we call it. And of course, there is a big private sector of bigger multinational and national and local seed companies. Yeah. Now, what can we say about the successes and failures of this formal seed system? Where our applied genetics and knowledge about seeds helped us to make better varieties and seeds. It's been an extremely successful system. I don't know, you have lived other times than I have lived, but how many of you are familiar with the Green Revolution? Does that still say something to you? Is it a Green Revolution, Green Revolution? We're talking now about a new Green Revolution in Africa. Well, we did. We don't even know anymore. But the Green Revolution, yeah, after World War II, was this amazing wave of activities that was made possible because of the very successful breeding, particularly in rice and maize, yeah, that generated crop varieties in those crops that were so much more productive, that gave so much higher yields, that some claim that saved the world from hunger and that kept communism at bay. It's a huge story, but you could say that in those years it went up to the 90s, where all these breeding programs have been able to develop superior yielding varieties that were taken up by a lot of farmers. And that has really increased food production in the world. Yeah. But not all farmers have taken up those varieties. Yeah. And we're now talking about the 60% ceiling of 60% of the farmers that have adopted varieties that came out of these breeding and seed programs. And this 60% is very, very rough. This varies extremely between crops, between countries, between continents. Yeah, I'll come back to that later. But what is it now that kind of inhibits this formal sector also to cater for the rest of the farmers, for that 40% of the farmers, that's above the ceiling or below the ceiling, depends on how you look at it. Green Revolution, on the one hand, is presented as something extremely successful, and on the other hand, as something that has failed because of those farmers that have not been able to benefit from it. And it depends a little on how you frame your story, whether you want to present success or whether you want to present failure. Both is possible. In a very nuanced way, you could say, well, there's success and failure. Yeah, they're both different sides of the same coin. But more important is to get a good understanding of what explains these successes and failures. From my point of view, there's not a general answer to that. Yeah. What I want to do is to share 2 examples with you. Yeah. As examples why the formal sector or where the formal sector has this struggle to cope with farmers to get any further than where they are now. My first example is from Guatemala. The Cuchumatanes is from where you see a picture on the right-hand side. And the Cuchumatanes is actually this highland part in Guatemala where maize was domesticated. Exciting place to be. Yeah. On the left-hand side, you see me with one of the 2 maize breeders from the national program in Guatemala. Guatemala is an extremely variable land in terms of agroecologies and types of farmers. Maize is an important crop, and they have 2 maize breeders. So these maize breeders have to make choices and they have to prioritize. Well, maize breeding is one of those crops in which breeders have been successful, extremely successful. And for that matter, the photo on the right-hand side of this breeding, you see a crop of an improved maize variety in Guatemala. This maize breeding has been so successful that the cob even, becomes bigger than what the husks can encapsulate. So if they've been able to manipulate the distribution of dry matter in such a way that, wow, everything goes into the cob and the husk leaves, because you don't eat them anyway. Now, our farmers in the Cuchumatanes are not really served by this type of varieties, because they say this type of variety, I cannot store the cobs. First of all, when I store them still partly in the field, the rain gets in. When I store them in the house, the insect gets in. So this is not my type of maize. It doesn't fit my system. And by the way, I don't like the taste because I eat another type of maize than the chickens on the coast. Yeah. So apart from this agroecological variation in the Cuchumatanes, where almost, depending on where you are on the slope of that hill, you have your own adapted maize varieties, they cannot do anything with these improved varieties. But the breeder can also not do very much for all those different type of farmers because, all those different type of farmers are many different type of programs that you could say you have to select for. So what is the possibility? How could they cater for more farmers or environments? That's a big question. Should we think about, a formal sector that even is so good that it caters also for these other type of farmers not yet covered? Or should we think, that's just 2 different type of systems, a formal and an informal system, parallel systems? Or should we think about hybridization? Still an open question as for me. But these questions needs to be answered if you say, okay, how are we going to support and develop the seed systems further? Which direction do you take? I have another example, potato in Kenya. Now, a detail about potato in Kenya, the biggest variety in Kenya is Shangi. And Shangi is a variety that escaped from a breeding program. One of the technicians of an institute picked it up and it got in something like 10, 15 years, the major variety, I think 70, 80% of all the planted potato in Kenya is Shangi. And they tracked it down to a breeding program of the International Potato Program that was on bacterial wilt. Yeah. Shangi has some advantages for the farmers there, great. And only recently, Shangi has become a formally released variety. That's a detail as compared, and a nice anecdotal element. It's not the message that I wanted to get across. The National Potato Program in Kenya, together, of course, supported by International Potato Center, is doing a fairly good job in getting new varieties out for farmers. Yeah, that may improve their production because of Phytophthora resistance, because this Shangi has no Phytophthora resistance. Yeah. One of the problems that the Kenyan potato program has is that farmers in Kenya, potato farmers in Kenya, don't buy clean seed from the formal seed sector. They recycle their seed. So from the harvest, they keep seed for next season. If you do that with potato, which is a vegetatively propagated crop, you accumulate diseases over the cycles. And that explains why Kenya, the potato yields are so low, so much lower than what potentially is possible if you would use improved seed. Yeah. But the farmers, even though you make the calculations and you show them this is profitable for you, it's not really working. They don't go out and buy and buy and buy again. Yeah. Now, there is this problem then that of course, reduces the productivity of the crop. But there is another aspect to that, is that the breeding and the seed program say, yeah, but if farmers don't buy seed, yeah, then how are we gonna, first of all, multiply more seed? Because if we multiply more seed and they don't buy it, then there is no use in multiplying. But if we don't multiply seed, how do we get the seed? How do we get our new varieties in farmers' fields? And so the idea is that if you don't have the farmers buying the seed as some sort of a motor of the formal seed system, you cannot recover your costs, not of seed production, but also not of breeding. And that is the dominant thinking that I think we see out there, is the idea that you need to have a market-based mechanism in place to keep breeding and seed programs of the formal sector going. And it's, of course, the model that makes the private sector do what it does. But the private sector is in those crops where that turns out to be working well. But it doesn't turn out to be working so well, for example, for potato in Kenya. So who's going to then do the breeding, and how? And how is your financial model running? This is a big issue. So this is also another example than Guatemala, why the formal sector is hitting a ceiling and finds it difficult to knock away the ceiling. Okay. And also here in potato is the question, of course, if you're going to improve the seed system, the seed sector, what pathways are you now gonna try? Are you convincing farmers that they have to buy seed, because otherwise the breeding program in the seed? Or are you going to support farmers in making their own seed that they save for next season cleaner by doing better selection, by doing more crop protection? Or are you looking for combinations? These are the questions. You first have to understand why in a particular crop, in a particular area or country, things hit the ceiling. And do your diagnosis of what the problem is. And on the basis of the problem, you try to find your development pathway. So the diagnosis of what the problem is very important, because depending on what you frame, what you identify as the problem, you choose a pathway, right? There's again some issues at the door. I hope it's not too bad. Okay, next one. So while having said that, we talk about the 60% ceiling, that it is actually not so, it is not general, and it varies a lot between crops and countries and continents and what have you. In my mind, I have a differentiation of groups of crops. And I distinguish 3 crop groups. We have the room till 4. Yeah. First of all, I'd say we have major food crops with major breeding programs and a commercial seed sector. And these breeding programs are both private sector and a little bit of public sector, yeah, which is more. And the seed dissemination is done by commercial seed companies. So typically, this is maize and the modern vegetables, yeah, all hybrids. The second group are modern vegetable, maybe not a good word. The modern vegetables is, let's say, the vegetables that we eat all over the world. So we're talking lettuce, we're talking tomato, onion, those kind of globally widespread and consumed vegetables. Yeah. Another group of crops are the major food crops that have medium-sized breeding programs with relatively small commercial seed sectors. And I'm talking about vegetatively propagated crops. So it's not only potato, but also cassava, sweet potato. And the small grains, for example, sorghum. But it's also the legumes, the pulses, the beans, the peas, yeah, the cowpeas. Most breeding of those crops is done for developing countries by the public sector. And then they run into that problem that the commercial seed enterprises don't really prosper so well because the farmers don't buy. So there is not much of a seed production and dissemination sector. And then as a third group, we have the minor food crops. And then we're talking NUS, for example, yeah, where there is hardly any formal breeding and hardly any commercial seed production. Yeah, I need to let someone in again, so sorry. So roughly these 3 categories, yeah, it is of course a lot more nuanced than that, but I would say that for the group major food crops that have good breeding programs and large size breeding program and a functional private sector for seed commercialization, their challenge is, you know, they also hit that ceiling of, there's only so much, 60–80% of the farmers that adopt new varieties. So their focus is not so much on maybe getting those other 20–30–40% of the farmers also using their seed, but they're working more on variety turnover. Yeah, they bring out new varieties and they want those new varieties to replace the older improved varieties. That's the challenge of food crop group number 1. Food crop number 2 is what I tried to show with the example of potato in Kenya, is that still the challenge is to make farmers buy the higher quality seed, be it higher quality because of the improved variety or because it is it is cleaner seed with less diseases, less contaminated. And for food group number 3, I don't know too much about food crops number 3 breeding and seed programs. Maybe it's this empty world, just like what we said in the beginning when we only thought about formal seed system and didn't realize what farmers were doing. And I look forward in exploring these minor food crop systems with you, not only how they look like now, but then also, of course, how you can improve them, right? So ending this story is that I started with saying we have a formal and an informal seed sector. But I'm finishing by saying, yeah, but that's far too easy and too general to talk about. There are many different situations, many different examples. Sometimes farmers know very well and have very good reasons not to adopt improved varieties, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes local varieties indeed perform lousy, but that's also not always the case. Sometimes farmers are willing to buy seeds, but in other times it isn't. And we have many different types of farmers. Yeah. We have richer farmers, not so rich farmers, sometimes even in the same village. Yeah. We have women, we have men, we have young, we have old. We have differences between farmers in different areas of the country, different parts of the continents, different crops. So yeah, you could actually say talking in generalities doesn't really work for me. Nevertheless, we tend to work with many pretty general assumptions. There is a lot of effort in the field going on to improve seed systems. There's many projects that try to develop and support existing seed practices, but others try to replace them with better ones. So in a way, I don't know, it's a pretty messy world out there. Yeah. And I think it could be a better approach to say, find out what works where, for which crop, for which type of farmer. Yeah. That's more or less my short introduction to seed systems, ending up with this messy world, of which there is still quite a lot from particular crop groups that we don't know. I'm now jumping to the last two slides from Ola, because despite this being a very messy world, this is also a world that is being governed, being deliberately governed by laws and people, institutions, but also governed in other ways. I hope, Ola, that this is a good bridge to your slides and that you can come in.
I can. Thank you, Connie. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you well.
Okay. Please give that slide one more click. There's one animation there that I want to get in.
More click.
Great. No, that's good. So,
Okay.
Hi everyone. I'm with you from Ås in Norway. I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in person. Now, at least I lost the slide.
Yeah, give a moment. Somebody is in the lobby.
Okay.
Oh, it's Zoo. She's sitting here in the room, but there she goes. Sorry, Ola. It's been a wonderful show again of how the digital world has us.
Why we want to meet in person.
Yes.
You show
Okay,
that you're really proving that it's worth it, huh? To fly down to Kampala. No, fantastic. Very happy to be with you, and thank you, Connie, for this great crash course and introduction to seed systems and seed system thinking. I will have a very short teaser here on governance, and I'll use one of these big staple crops that you talked about, maize, as you see here. And this slide, the underlying picture here is from a paper in Nature, which really shows, I think, about 10,000 years of history of that crop in one single slide. So starting at the left there with the wild foremother of maize, the teosinte, and then as you move towards the right, you have different stages in that adaptive radiation, you can say, in evolutionary terms, that happened when this crop spread throughout the Americas and diversified into this amazingly diverse crop. And then towards the very right, you have an illustration of modern, or let's say Mendelian, breeding in maize with deliberate crossing and development of cultivars. So from teosynthesis, first domestication or beginning of its co-evolution with humans, all the way up to modern cultivars. And some of the tensions that you touched upon here in this field of seed systems, Connie, is caused by the fact that farmers are using both these local varieties and these improved varieties. And historically, the access and the seed systems around maize, in this example, has of course been governed, because what do we mean by the term governance? Let me read you a definition by a colleague here who is an institutional economist. Governance refers to the way societies handle issues of coordination and conflict regarding the use of resources. So let me repeat that. It's about how societies handles coordination and conflict regarding the use of resources. And of course, people have always had ways of handling coordination and conflicts, also around such things as seeds. So there, as Connie said, that there was never an empty world there. There has always been some norms, local traditions, institutions, as we call them, around the production and also the access to seeds. But with the new cultivars, a new type of governance regime kicked in. And I think one can say that because of that, and because of all the money that was involved in the new business of plant breeding, particularly in a crop like maize, we ended up with a quite conflictual situation. And internationally, this has been referred to as the seed wars. International negotiations that started back in the 80s, 90s, and are still ongoing, with still difficult issues being discussed today when it comes to governance. And how are farmers to manage? How are they to navigate this? Because they grow in very many countries around the world, both these local varieties and these modern varieties, if you want to call them that comes with different governance regimes. So if you can help me now to my next slide, Connie. Yeah. So starting in 1930, I think we can say, with the US Congress passing the Plant Patent Act, it became possible to own a cultivar. Of course, you had hybrid breeding, which was also a way to get sort of biological control over the material you had bred, but at the same time, legislation followed. And with the US Plant Patent Act, the first intellectual property rights were taken on new varieties. So what I've added to the 10,000-year figure here now is just a figure from crop science, already quite old, but showing at that time how much of the breeding lines used to develop one particular popular variety at the time that were under some sort of intellectual property right. In the US, we're mostly talking about patents. So if you give it a couple more clicks, Connie. Yeah, no, one back now. There. So then you had a situation where it was possible to own, have ownership to improved varieties. And as these seed wars unfolded at the international level, I think you can say that it was a counter-reaction. It was a reaction to this, that we went from a situation where genetic resources, where both these wild relatives and these local varieties are often sort of called genetic resources, where they were governed as a global commons, as the common heritage of mankind. This changed in the 90s when the principle was established that it was the sovereign rights of nations to control the genetic resources originating on their land. So in a way, also genetic resources at the time became privatized, or at least you can say it became ownership was established over them. So this is a new situation. So what we want to talk more about when we meet in Uganda are these different types of governance regimes that apply to these different types of varieties that farmers grow. We want to talk about the importance of distinguishing between governance of seeds on one side and governance of varieties on the other side. They are related, but it's different, and it's different rules involved. Up on the screen here now, we just have some of the terms that we will be touching on or talking about, of course. So for cultivars, there are different types of intellectual property rights. We can talk about plant breeders' rights, plant variety protection, patents, and contract law. And sometimes we talk about patent tickets, where with several layers of these types of governance of ownership on top of each other. Then on genetic resources, that part of the diversity, those varieties, we have the plant treaty. The plant treaty is, in the case of maize, covering the entire genus except 3 species, curiously. And those that fall outside the treaty would be covered by the Convention of Biological Diversity, the CBD. And within the treaty, it's relevant to talk about what are these access and benefit sharing rules, this multilateral system that has been established there, but also what are the principles of farmers' rights. We'll also talk about, the very new things that are happening in terms of including in the multilateral system also so-called digital sequence information, something that has been decided now in the CBD under the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework. This will also have an effect on the treaty and the governance, even of genetic data of this diversity. So that was actually all I had now. That was just a teaser, as I said, a primer on some of the issues that we'll talk about. And, well, let me end by saying what really, now I showed you maize, Maize, one of the most proprietary crops in the world, with a huge private sector, etc. Now, when we talk about opportunity crops or neglected and underutilized species, it's important to think through, are we having the maize model in mind when we talk about seed systems and talk about seed system development also for those crops? And if so, is the maize model appropriate? Those are questions that we should address together when we meet. Over to you again, Connie.
Thank you, Ola. Then this is the last slide. So yeah, as I said in the beginning, most of what you got to hear today is about the major big food crops in which a lot of work has been done, both in terms of breeding and seed production, but also in terms of studying all those things. And now we go to these NUS, or opportunity crops they're called nowadays. Yeah, unexplored territory. How are they different? Yeah. And what of these differences actually plays a role in understanding why the seed systems are the way they are? And how can these seed systems become supported, improved, so that they serve farmers better? That they can play a bigger role in these functions that the NUS crops are having in food and resilience, and food and resilience is actually the 2 main dimensions. Yeah. And what interventions can we think of that bring that about? I really think this is unexplored territory, and I really think that this is worth to further explore and have, you know, more food for thought in the coming seminars, and then flesh it out once we are in Uganda. So having said about food for thought for the next seminars, we have a slightly adapted seminar. Oh, no, sorry, one more thing. If you want to read up in terms of preparing for the course, nobody is going to read all the stuff that we shared with you, but I'd say please give this article that Ola and his colleagues published 2 years ago, and in which this food seed system concept is central. Give that a priority. They have been able to integrate a lot of the most recent literature, and it will also help us to use this model in the course to see how that plays out when we look at NUS crops. Yeah. And if you want to maybe read more of what I thought and presented, then this second presentation is probably where you find most of these aspects, but framed in terms of the root and the tuber crops, the vegetatively propagated one. Very last slide is about the upcoming seminars, and I will start share. So I would say, let's keep in mind that for the NUS crops, none of us is an expert. Yeah. And probably the farmers are the experts. So we'll go out and explore. The new seminar schedule looks like this. We have had among us people like Ola and myself. We also are suddenly called to meetings and other obligations. And so was Steph for the meeting that was scheduled on the 13th of March. So we'll juggle around a bit. The meeting for the 13th of March stays on as scheduled, but we found Kai de Sousa willing to present us his experiences with tricot trialing. And tricot trialing is something that is, you know, also, you could say, suddenly become a very interesting way of evaluating varieties and seed under large number of farmers. It'll be exciting to hear about this new method and how they developed it and what it helped them doing. I will share the PowerPoint with you after this meeting. So yeah, you can also have the new schedule then. There is the seminar of the 18th that was scheduled. Yeah. And Steph is moving his publication, his seminar to that date. We hope we'll have the seminar that was scheduled on the 18th, on the 19th, but it is yet to be confirmed. Okay, I will, after this meeting, later tonight or tomorrow morning, schedule all these meetings and send you the links. We will not have it hybrid, so probably doing it only online because the presenters are online. We might be safe from all the problems we ran into today. Again, I apologize for that. I apologize for Microsoft and Teams and whatever internet complication was there. With this, I want to end this seminar and stop with the presentation, but I'd like to stay online for questions that you may have. Maybe first of all, let's see whether there are some questions related with the seminar, and then questions or urgencies or for information that you may have in relation to our traveling and being in Uganda. Okay. Hey, I thank you so much for your patience during all this struggling, and I particularly also like to thank those who are here with me in the room. I already love you for bearing with the situation and showing that you're able to improvise together with me. Okay, that's it. Closure. Now I have to think through to what modus I will shift in order to capture your questions. Should I stop sharing then? Probably, right? And no, I can still share, but I will maybe see. What do people online now see? Sebastian, what are you seeing?
I see all the participants, but no one has the camera
Okay.
on. I'm the only one.
You are the only one. Okay, I'll also turn on my camera. If we all turn on the camera, then things might get stuck. But maybe this is then the screen to see whether we have questions from your side. The question. Questions on the presentation. You can also keep your questions and we'll pick it up again when we are in Kampala. Desire, please come online, unmute and throw your question in.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for this quite insightful presentation. I had a question before, but I think now I start having some kind of answers, but I can ask again the question. It's more about the beginning of your presentation when you said there were different ways of conceptualizing seed systems. So different definitions, and it depends on how some definitions they got more, let's say, citation, get more attention among scholars, etc. And I can imagine that it's more about battle of ideas, about how to show the seed system to the audience, to the public audience, etc. So for me, it's a kind of a bit tricky question: is what are the key components of the seed system which remain the same over time, and what are the one more fluctuating, changing over times based on the context also. So it's more broad question that we can maybe discuss later, but for me, it's important to figure out what are the key aspects that remains in all the conceptualization that you have read about, and then what are the more specific one, and how do they evolve over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Desire, for throwing it up. Yes, let's pick this up again later on, but I don't want to leave this totally unanswered. If you are an economist, yeah, you are interested in other aspects of the seed system. And then you might also want to have a model or a conceptualization of the seed system that serves you, but that's not going to serve an ethnobotanist, for example. Yeah. So even the aspects that you would say are always there is difficult to answer, because the aspects you're interested in depend on how you engage with the seed, what you have with the seed from your scientific discipline or from your practitioner position. Yeah. So I don't think that there is one system that would fit us all. Yeah. You choose your system according to the interest and the way of looking at the system that you have for one reason or another. And even you could say that over time, you see that interest shift. At some point of time, some sort of aspect has been sufficiently researched and published on that for you as a PhDer coming into this arena, it becomes, there's another study looking at the replacement of improved varieties, of local varieties and so you try to move always to the research questions and aspects that are cutting edge. And cutting edge is usually also full of hypes. Yeah. I hope that suffices for now, and we can decide to pick up on it later.
Yeah.
In Kampala, or maybe in one of the other seminars. Let's see how that works.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other question? I don't see any hands at the moment. Is there any question about the upcoming seminars? Is there any question about traveling and being in Uganda?